welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall, and joining us for this edition is State Representative Chris Markey, a return visit again. It's your turn, as they say in the rotation, so thanks for joining us.
I'm grateful for the opportunity.
As we tape the show today, obviously we are in the midst of the pandemic with the coronavirus. Tell us a little bit about, and I've asked the other reps too, about what, from your standpoint, how have you been handling the work on Beacon Hill through this?
So mostly I've been working at my law office in New Bedford. I go in every morning, spending a lot more time dealing with constituent issues now. The constituent issues are pretty consistent throughout the last 9 years in Dartmouth, and there's been definitely a peak. A lot of people who have never had to apply for unemployment are applying for unemployment now. Small businesses that had done very well over the last 20 years are having to jump through a lot of hurdles for the PPP and other loans that they need. I've been trying to help them with those issues. And then spending really much of March and early April with the hospital, trying to make sure that they had all the proper PPE stuff, trying to figure out if manufacturers could assist in that way. Getting groups of those guys together. One of the people in New Bedford who's been tremendous with Anthony Sapienza, who is just one of those people who truly gives to the community, and it's pretty impressive to watch the number of hours that guy has volunteered to try to use his resources and his connections to get things done in New Bedford, and we owe him a great deal of gratitude.
How has the state, do you think, responded to the unemployment claims and just the issues that you've mentioned and the other day-to-day issues that come up? Obviously, the state agencies are hit hard by this issue too, because they're working from home. So is there a lag? How has the state responded?
Well, I think they've done a tremendous job. I think the administration has done a tremendous job. I think it's by far the best job any governor has done in the country. And if you look at overall how this has been treated all of March and April and how it will affect in November and December and January, I think Massachusetts is in the best position. And I say that very emphatically. I really feel that the governor has looked at the science for the long term. He hasn't looked at what sounds good in a soundbite for today or what sounds good for a soundbite for next week. But he's looked at it and listened to the experts, and they realize that this is a long-term or relatively long-term crisis. This isn't a hurricane that can get fixed up in 2 or 3 months. This is going to be through the fall that we have to have some infrastructure in place. He started to establish that early on. So I think that they have done a tremendous job. With that, if you look at, again, this isn't the really hot issues or the sexy subjects, as they say. He set up the unemployment system in the cloud, which allowed there to be an expansive, and that was done before this. Mm-hmm. That allowed from us to go from just dozens of claim reps for the unemployment to hundreds that are working.
The number of claims have been unprecedented.
They did more in a week than they did all of 2019 at one point. So in the ability to scale that up, they've done that. It wasn't going to happen overnight. It was going to take a couple of weeks, and I thought that they did a tremendous job on it. I look at his ingenuity and his use of his relationships with people he knows after he kind of got stuck by the federal government. He had ordered early on those N95 masks. They got, as he described it, hijacked in New York by the feds and got redistributed. He found a way to meet with friends of friends, philanthropists, to get those other N95 masks from China, and then eventually everyone heard about the Patriots helping out in the crafts, which is great. But it was his ideas. It was his, and that's problem solving, and that's what you want from an administrator or an executor.
As we look at this, obviously the issue right now obviously is funding, money. the closing of businesses, the lack of revenue coming into the towns, coming into the states. There's so many question marks for them. How, and obviously we're in a fiscal year right now, but July 1st, theoretically, a new fiscal year will begin. Will things change dramatically on July 1st?
I think nothing is going to change dramatically. I think things will start to open up slowly, and we will progress in a pretty slow fashion. And some people say it's too conservative, some people say it's too fast. But I guess if we're doing it, if the extremes are upset, then we're probably doing it the right way. But I think it will not be totally different than what it is right now. It's really 4 or 5 months from now is some of the funding that we typically have isn't available. There is significant cuts that are probably going to be greater than the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. And we need to brace for that, and we need to prepare for that. But I also look at it as the reopening, really, and how we deal with things is a way for people, business people, to be more creative, think outside the box, and figure out really ways in which they can accomplish their business in a different fashion. And I hope the government does the same thing. I hope we really, one of the things I've tried to do is keep a journal to some degree, and at least of the phone calls I've made, to try to look back at it and say, what did I learn? What can we do better? And I think if everyone did that, we would probably learn a ton from it.
Because I would think that just service-wise, from the state perspective, things are going to change. Their ability to do X is going to be different when that new fiscal year comes. Because as you mentioned, there could be cuts that are worse than 2008.
Yeah, I think one is just having people in the office, right? I mean, you look at just what we do around here. Fishermen have to go up to Boston sometimes to get their licenses. Those types of things when there's issues, they may be resolved on Zoom. Registry of motor vehicle. They do thousands of different things every day. Those things may be done more remotely and on the computer. Applications within town hall, city hall, licensing board meetings, right? All those
I saw
things.
that the courts are still, there's no trial juries now until September.
Yeah, that's probably going to be longer than that as well.
Really? Yeah. Well, I know they put it till September right now.
But I can't imagine having 12 strangers, 16 strangers sitting next to each other in a courtroom for 6 hours, 8 hours a day. I don't think people feel that comfortable. We're going to have to find solutions and have the courts be creative. I mean, one of the things that I keep speaking about when I talk to lawyer friends is maybe have 2 shifts, 2 6-hour shifts, and hold the court open for 12 hours and have people come in like a doctor's appointment rather than the early morning 9 o'clock call. Change that up a bit. And then even when you get into the courthouse, they're going to have directions, follow the arrows, just as you do at Shaw's or supermarkets. All of those things, it's going to be a change for a little while, but maybe we become more understanding of each other, and maybe we become a little bit more compassionate towards our brethren.
As the state, as we tape the show, the State House is still closed to the public, correct?
Correct.
And obviously the RMV's closed. I know the work is still going on. The courts, I mean, I know the court workers are still there, but how does that affect, in general, when these buildings are closed? How does that affect? I don't want to say the work getting done, but it must limit what can get done. Let's put it that way.
Well, it limits. You're now, instead of pulling a file out and putting it into a box which then gets called into a courtroom, you're now pulling out a file, you're making phone calls, making sure a defense lawyer is available, making sure the client is available, making sure that the prosecutor is available, make sure that the probation is on the phone, and trying to coordinate all that is really where the courts are spending most of their time, not on the actual substance of what they're doing, but it's more procedural things. But not a lot is getting done. I mean, courts, if anyone has ever been involved in a civil case or a criminal case, it all relates to leverage. And that's how you negotiate. I mean, we negotiated with whether you're buying a car, it's leverage. How much money do you have? How bad do you need a car? Same thing with court is, if there's no jury trials, as we talked about, and a defendant knows he's not going to be accountable for another year or 6 months or 9 months, what's the pressure for him to try to resolve a case? So now there's going to be a continued backlog of cases that don't get resolved between March 15th of this year till maybe September of this year. That there's very few cases. You need to rely on resolving those cases in order to bring in the new cases. So we just keep pushing the can down the road, as they say. So I'm interested to see how we do it. I think we need to really think about, with the courts, the hours, the scheduling, and then also the use of the video conferencing, which I think has proven to be effective in a lot of things and very ineffective in a few things.
I knew it's funny because I had a jury duty notice that I was supposed to go in June, and now it's been obviously postponed, and they said you're good for another year. But I look at, I've got a 16-year-old that wants to get his permit because he just turned, and obviously he's not able to do that yet. And
there was a mention of that. I'll find out a solution to that, because I think there's a way to.
But I would have mentioned that that things like that, at some point there's going to be a cascade of work that has to get that's going to get done. There's going to be a wave in just offices.
Yes, there is going to be a huge increase in productivity for a very short period of time, and there's going to be an expectation. That's one of the things I keep saying, that we need to really try to resolve these cases. Even if you're not getting everything you want, we need to start to resolve these cases more quickly and more effectively.
Talk briefly about the just the budget in general. I know obviously that you guys were doing well in the budget process until this hit. Everything's really stopped. You're not the body. Everybody's waiting to look at really what the finances will be. Tell us a bit about what the process is going to be that you see right now for the next couple weeks.
I think the process will be slow. I think I look at how we'll do the budget as what we call a 1/12 budget, at least for a couple of months, and that is just doing 1 month at a time.
But there's an end. You have only a certain amount.
Listen, we've changed the rules enough to in a way to make sure it happens. I mean, we have to be very conservative this year on the way we spend the money.
Absolutely.
There's not going to be a lot of money. I don't know how much money we're going to get from the federal government. There's some promise of a decent amount, but ultimately, we until it's actually in our accounts, we won't know. But there's a lot of things that the government has done and people rely on that might not be there. So as a community, that's why I keep talking about the idea of maybe we all get along a little bit better. We look at our brother and we look at and say, hey, can we do something more? I hope that's something that we do, because it's not going to be easy for the government to be able to do that.
And your priorities have probably, and I'm generalizing here, have probably changed with what's been going on. I remember I asked your colleague, Rep. Hendricks, I said, as you look at this now, the budget, do you see like healthcare now issues being in the forefront? Because this isn't going to be done anytime soon. Has your, I don't want to say your focus changed, but money might have to go toward that wasn't supposed to.
Well, yeah, there's a huge problem with the healthcare disparity. We look at disproportionate hospitals, which, when we say disproportionate hospital, we mean a hospital that takes in more public health payments, which is really getting paid like 86 cents on the dollar. So you're losing money every time someone comes in. You're really losing 13% of your revenues. In a hospital like St. Luke's, the vast majority, up to over 85% or 80%, are non-private pay, which is public pay, which means for most of their client or their patients, they're getting paid less than what private insurance company pays.
Right.
And because of the nature of our society down here, that's a problem. We need to find solutions to that to make sure that they are able to survive. South Coast Hospital has done a tremendous service to our community.
Well, the teamwork they've had with the communities has been, well, all the way from Wareham to Fall River has been.
They've been tremendous. They have been very helpful in making sure that the community has, access to testing, even though there's not a lot of testing. They're making sure that happens. They're making sure that they're available to handle all the COVID people. They are being proactive. I wish more healthcare systems would do that. That's not happening everywhere, but I think South Coast has done a tremendous job on that.
So going back, the 1/12 budget, you've got a couple of those that you look at. At some point, you got to figure that there's going to be a I don't want to say a final budget, but something that's more concrete than just the 1/12, I would imagine.
Yes, I think that will, and it will be not as elaborate as the ones we've done in the past.
Are you back to the drawing board? Really, all three branches? Are you back to the drawing board when it comes to this?
It could end up being
Really?
back to the drawing board for that, to figure out what we need, at least for this fiscal year coming up, and it may be even the next fiscal year. But there's definitely a need to start to think about the way in which we do things and what's effective. And again, what are the community's priorities and the Commonwealth's priorities? And seems to be becoming more and more difficult these days.
The other big issue, obviously, that we talked about off camera that has been dominating the news is the protests that have gone around all across the country, but I know here in New Bedford that have been very peaceful. People talking about the death of George Floyd. I'm just kind of, you're a former prosecutor, I'm just kind of looking for your reaction to what's taken place, and certainly here in New Bedford, it seems as though that the protesters, the people are out there, they're expressing their opinion, but things are going well as far as the way everybody's handling it.
In this area, yes. I think first you got to look at, I think there's two things that's happened in the last week. One is a really horrible homicide that occurred in Minneapolis, in which it's still inexplicable to me how that could happen with 4 other officers there. I know there has to be something further with the officer's relationship with that one police officer who's been charged. And that is a horrific, horrific scene. It's a horrific action. And it is incredibly troubling, particularly as a former prosecutor, someone who I have a very good relationship with the police. I respect them a lot. But when you see that one bad apple or those 4 bad apples, and you wonder, how does it get to that point? And then I start to think about what happened earlier in the week, is this woman in Central Park. And to me, that's the racism that a typical African-American man has to deal with every day. And to me, that is absolutely outrageous. I mean, that woman literally making up charges against an African-American man.
Yeah.
While she's the one in the wrong.
And all he asked was for her to put the
follow
dog
the
on
law.
the leash.
Yeah. And she's the one in the wrong. And he's the one saying, you need to do that. And she takes this concept of, well, it's a black man and I'm a white woman, and I can say this because the cops are going to believe me. And for that to have such a deep-rooted belief in our society, that's what we need to do. And I think, I keep saying to myself, what can I do more? What can I do more? And I've really started to contemplate that. But tweets aren't going to be the answer. Prayers and thoughts aren't going to be the answer. It's trying to listen to people. It's trying to figure out that why it is that we get to this point where we think African-American men are always causing trouble, and we need to stop that. It's ridiculous.
Is it something that can be, for lack of a better word, legislatively done? And I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. Is that?
I think there are policies that we can look at and try to formulate or encourage people to participate in. I've been on a lot of criminal justice reform things, and I keep reminding people who believe that the criminal justice system needs an entire reform. The criminal justice system is the criminal justice system. It is not a social justice system. And there's a big difference. The criminal justice system isn't there to resolve social ills. They can't do it. They're not equipped. We're lawyers. I know how to get evidence into a trial. I know how to prevent it from happening. I know how to deal with procedural things, and I try to be a good trial lawyer. I can't solve those problems in the courtroom. The social justice issues that come we need to be able to do as a society. The fact that there's significant discrepancy in education, employment, payment.
And we're seeing that that's been exacerbated by the coronavirus
Yes.
that we've seen.
Yes. And so we need to find policies that, like I've always said that, we need to find ways to remove hurdles for those people who have had difficulties. And it's not just a black-white thing either. It's a poor thing. If you're poor and you come out of a poverty-stricken community, you are a real hero now. Like those people battle day in and day out. The stuff I never had to battle. I've been blessed with my parents giving me all the things they've given me. But when you look at any kid who comes from a poor neighborhood, you have to say, you got to give them extra credit. You got to make something easier for them at some point. And that's, I think, one of the things we can look at, whether it be education in particular areas. You grow up in a particular area, you're not paying for college. And the idea, there should be an expectation of college for everybody. There was never a question that I wasn't going to go to college in my family, ever. It was okay, from the time I was a kid, you're going to go to college, just where are you going to go to college, where are you going to go to college? It was talked about all the time. I think there's a lot of kids with that opportunity isn't there, and we need to find ways to make sure that that happens. We don't need to be giving extra special scholarships to the kids from Weston because they got better grades and they get the Adams Awards. That's nice for the kids from Weston. Well, their house is worth $900,000. Well, there's a kid on North Front Street who's barely making it. That's what the money should go. So we need to maybe think about those things and give incentives to the people who need them and remove the obstacles for those people.
What about on the law enforcement side? I mean, I know they talk about retraining police. I don't know, is that something that is determined by, in a sense, the state or the legislature, or? Yeah,
we do lots of things in regard to that in the budget, particularly where we try to provide incentives for law enforcement or whoever to more training. X number of dollars shall be used towards racial training or that type of thing. We can do that. But ultimately, it still comes back to this deep-rooted belief, and we need to eliminate that. And I think the only way to really do that, and it sounds corny and maybe foolish for people who think that I'm naive, but it's actually listening to people. I mean,
But people also say that as you're listening to them, there's got to be action too. It's nice that you're listening to our issues, but you need to take.
Yeah, but I think once you listen to somebody and you hear them out, you have a new appreciation for it. I mean, I've done, even in I had my beliefs back in 2010, that when I first ran for office, I thought X, Y, Z. I started listening to people, and over the last 10 years, my opinions have changed dramatically in some things and not so much in others. But that's what happens, is eventually it's not going to be a switch that turns on and it changes. But if we really start to listen to what people say and why they are those things, we start to consider those things in our daily activities. And we make sure that we tell our children the importance of it because we're learning from it. And that's what we need to do. And I don't want to call it a lost generation because I don't want to lose it, but we need to find a way to get people to work together. And I think the only way to do it is really to listen to them, and then we can act accordingly.
Is that something that you think the legislature, the body will take up as they're watching stuff now? Is that something that will be on the radar screen very soon?
Yes, I think we're going to vote on some stuff on the way in which the COVID pandemic has affected the minority communities, and we're going to try to work on figuring that in the discrepancies. But having those numbers educates us, and then we look at it and we say, this is the reasons why. Like, we can figure out solutions to it. But we need to incentivize better behavior. I mean, that's what we do. That's what we can do at a legislative level, and that is the only way to do that is, again, making sure people listen to each other. Don't just assume just because I'm white that I'm a particular type of person and you're black and you're a particular type of person. That's exactly what we're not in America. And that's why I hope the one benefit to this is we have a sincere effort to change the way we believe things, because if we change the way we believe things, we're going to change the way we act.
And it starts, I think you touched on it briefly, it starts in education too. How are kids interacting with each other just from a small age all the way up, I think.
And it has to happen at a young age. It has to happen from the moment, you start to walk. You should never, I say this, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there's a whole terminology called white privilege. That shouldn't be white privilege. It should be the expectation. But it's minority exclusion, I think, is really the what's happening is everybody should live like that. That's not a privilege. It's anybody who puts in a good day's work, who works hard, who does everything. That's the way life should be for Americans. Doesn't matter what color you are, what nationality you are. That's what we are. And right now we have, I think it's more minority exclusion of people where we're not bringing them in, we're not listening to their concerns, because this deep-rooted, long-term bias, and we need to change it. That's what we need to do.
And it's, I go back to the COVID thing, but you think of obviously the first responders who've done yeoman's work, but those people that are on the front lines, the grocery store workers and the people who don't make a heck of a lot of money on a weekly basis, they're the poor people of all colors, and they're the ones that are getting the sick the most.
But the question is, why are they the poorer people?
Yeah.
That's what we got to change.
Yeah.
Because it's baloney. It's not right. It's just, that's what we need to change, and we need to have they need to have the expectation that their kid's going to go to college, that they're going to get the best out of whatever they can for their kid, and their kid's going to reach their potential.
And they're still working like 50 hours a week. I mean,
hey, I haven't tipped more generously than I've ever. I mean, in the last month and a half or 3 months, I have been tipping very generously, because I know it. I see it when there's some kid behind a Cumberland Farms plexiglass, or he's at Just Keep the Change, or if he's at Sunrise Bakery. They're working their tails off.
Yeah.
And I'm making sure that they know we appreciate them.
Sounds good. We'll end it with that. So a busy time coming up, and we'll talk to you in a couple months for updates on them. I'm sure it's I'm sure it's not going to get any easier for you folks up there with the way things are right now.
No, I mean, my big concern is the education, how we go back to the education of our children. We need to find a better way to do that. If we're going to, we want to make sure everything's in place for that. And I think Commissioner Riley's doing a tremendous job. He's got a lot of people working on it, but I hope we can do that.
And quickly, I know the education bill that you guys passed last fall, I think, everybody's very excited about it. Do you have an inkling? Is that going to stay? Is that going to get hit?
No, I'm sure everything's going to get hit in some fashion.
Yep.
It's just going to be delayed. It's the principles behind it will try to be followed through. I know that. The ability to actually follow through with it this year may be a little bit more difficult to reach those goals, but we're still marching forward with that, and I see that happening. Again, that wasn't a short-term try to fix on the education system. That's a generations fix. So it's going to take some time anyway.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Nice to be here. Thanks again.
All right. For this edition of the Beacon Hill Report, I'm Jim Marshall, our guest Chris Markey, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.